Alexander may be confined to a wheelchair, but he's still the heir to the Blake fortune and legacy. Marrying him would mean uniting our family with the Blakes, Victoria. It would repair your reputation and secure your future. Victoria scoffed, shaking her head. So I'm supposed to chain myself to a cripple just to keep up appearances? Do you realize how absurd that sounds? Eleanor's expression tightened, but her voice stayed coldly steady. This isn't about appearances, Victoria. It's about responsibility. After your recent escapades, the press and the public have taken note. Marrying into the Blake family would give you the stability you need, and the prestige. Victoria's eyes narrowed, the familiar glint of defiance sparking in them. So, this is a punishment. You're going to sell me off to save face. Is that it? Enough, Victoria. Richard's voice cut through the air, sharper than either woman expected. He leaned forward, his patience visibly thinning. This is a chance to make amends, to show this family and the world that you're capable of something greater than these scandals you keep bringing down on us. Victoria glared back at her father, her voice low and laced with bitterness. And if I say no? Eleanor's gaze was unyielding. You won't say no, Victoria. You don't have that luxury anymore. Victoria clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms. The very idea of being tethered to a life with Alexander, someone she viewed as no more than a trophy figure, broken and incomplete, was unthinkable. This is my life, she hissed, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. Not some game for you to play. Eleanor met her daughter's defiance with a calm, piercing stare. This is your life, Victoria. And right now, it's spiraling out of control. You either marry Alexander and bring honor back to this family, or you face the consequences of your choices alone. For a moment, the room fell into silence, the tension thick as each family member weighed the gravity of Eleanor's words. Victoria's mind raced, her options limited, her future no longer in her hands. The frustration and humiliation burned within her, but the steel in her mother's gaze told her all she needed to know. This was not a request. Swallowing her pride, Victoria turned away, her voice a cold, defeated murmur. Fine. I'll think about it. As she walked out of the room, back straight and chin high, the bitterness simmered beneath her flawless exterior, already plotting her next move. Sarah was passing the library's towering mahogany doors when the hushed yet urgent voices of her parents, Richard and Eleanor Caldwell, stopped her in her tracks. Their voices, normally muted behind the library's thick doors, carried into the hall with an unfamiliar desperation. Inside, Eleanor's voice broke through, sharp and tinged with frustration. We can't keep covering for her, Richard. This latest scandal could ruin us. We've made every concession for Victoria, but it's not enough. Nothing is ever enough. Richard's response came, his voice deep and low, filled with a weariness Sarah had rarely heard. I know, Eleanor. She's pushing us into a corner. But we have a solution. A way to salvage everything. Eleanor's sigh cut through the tension, and what solution is that? There was a pause, the air almost crackling with the intensity of the words yet to come. Sarah, Richard finally said, his voice carrying a note of reluctant resolve. We'll offer Sarah and Victoria's place to the Blakes. Sarah's heart stopped. For a moment, the library's opulent surroundings, the polished wood, the carefully arranged leather-bound books, the crackling fire, seemed to fade around her. She pressed her hand to her chest as her pulse raced, the reality of her father's words hitting her like a punch. Eleanor's response was hesitant, as though processing the implications. You mean? We send Sarah to marry Alexander? Yes, Richard replied, his tone hardening with the weight of his decision. Victoria has made it clear she won't be bound to him, and the Blakes don't know Sarah as they do Victoria. In public, both of them carry our name, our reputation. The distinction is easily hidden. The words echoed in Sarah's mind, each one a blow that left her struggling to breathe. Her life treated like some pawn in a social game. How quickly she'd gone from the quiet Miller daughter to a nameless Caldwell, forced into a life where her family saw her not as a person, but as a solution. Do you really think the Blakes will accept her? Eleanor asked, sounding more cautious than doubtful. She's proven herself to be adaptable, even in society. And, unlike Victoria, she won't bring any scandal with her, Richard replied, a glimmer of hope creeping into his voice. Sarah's steady, responsible, even humble. She'll handle this with grace, and with her as their daughter-in-law, we secure our reputation and our family's future. Eleanor hesitated before answering, the slightest crack in her voice betraying a hint of pity. It's a lot to ask of her, Richard. She's only just begun to adjust here. Adjust? He repeated, sounding almost amused. This is her adjustment. She was born into this life, Eleanor, and maybe this is her true calling. We owe her parents nothing but gratitude for raising her well. Now, she must learn to fulfill the role she was meant to play. In the silence that followed, Sarah's hands shook, her grip on the doorframe tightening as she felt the sting of tears she refused to let fall. Her life, a transaction, a fix to save a family she'd only recently met. She'd known her place here was tenuous, yet hearing it spoken so coldly laid bare the isolation she'd felt ever since stepping into the Caldwell world. Then, Eleanor's sigh reached her again, softer now, almost resigned. And what if Sarah refuses? She won't, Richard said, his tone dismissive, as if he'd never even considered that she'd deny them. She's obedient, far more than Victoria. And once she understands her role, she'll accept it. A surge of defiance rose within Sarah, clashing against the vulnerability that threatened to consume her. Slowly, she backed away from the door, retreating down the hallway. She could barely hear her own footsteps over the echo of their voices in her mind. She was to be given away as if she were an item in their possession, a tool to secure their reputation and, by extension, their wealth. Back in her room, Sarah sank onto the bed, the gravity of the moment pressing down on her. A life in a marriage arranged not for her happiness but to conceal her sister's indiscretions and keep the Caldwell name untarnished. Sarah stood outside the Caldwell library, where the words she'd overheard the night before still echoed in her mind. She clenched her hands, steadying herself as she prepared to enter. Today, she would confront her biological parents, not to beg, not to fight, but to make her own choice. When she opened the library doors, Richard looked up, startled, while Eleanor's teacup paused mid-air, her face drawn. Neither had expected her this morning, certainly not like this. The sharpness in Sarah's gaze, the poised determination, was something they were unaccustomed to seeing from the girl they'd labeled quiet and submissive. "Good morning," Sarah began, her voice even but resolute. "I overheard your conversation yesterday. About the arrangement with the Blakes." Richard straightened, an air of authority enveloping him. "Sarah, this arrangement isn't easy for us either, but sometimes we all have to make sacrifices for the greater good of the family." Sarah's face remained calm, her eyes never wavering. "For the family's good," she echoed. "I understand. And I'll do it." Eleanor blinked in surprise, clearly unprepared for her calm acceptance. "You'll accept the engagement?" "Yes," Sarah said, her tone clear and unwavering. "I'll marry Alexander Blake." A faint sense of satisfaction crossed Richard's face, but Eleanor's frown deepened, uncertain of Sarah's motives. "But why would you agree so easily, Sarah?" Eleanor asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. "You barely know Alexander, and this life isn't what you're used to." Sarah met her gaze, drawing upon every ounce of strength instilled in her by her true parents, the Millers. "I'm doing this to protect my family, the Millers," she replied softly. "If I marry Alexander, it'll mean Victoria has less reason to go after them. She's already creating tension, spreading lies. It's only a matter of time before she makes things difficult for them back home." Richard and Eleanor exchanged glances. It was as if they were beginning to realize, for the first time, that the girl before them was far more than just a displaced country girl. Her loyalty to the Millers, the family who had raised her, was something they could barely comprehend. But it was that loyalty that seemed to cement her decision now. "Sarah, this is no small commitment," Richard warned, though his tone softened. "The Blakes are not easy people, and they expect you to behave as Victoria would. This isn't a simple substitution." "I understand that," Sarah replied. She drew in a steady breath, her expression giving no hint of doubt. "I've survived a great deal to stand here today, Mr. Caldwell. I can manage this, too." Eleanor watched her. "Then if you're to go through with this, you'll need to train. Society events, managing household staff, navigating the Blake family's complicated reputation, these are no small matters." Sarah nodded, holding her gaze. "Then teach me. Show me what I need to know." The determination in her voice left Richard momentarily speechless, and even Eleanor was at a loss for words. This was no passive, naive girl in front of them. Sarah had made her choice with a clear-eyed resolve that neither could ignore. Very well, then, Richard said at last, with the faintest hint of a nod. We'll make the necessary arrangements with the Blakes. As Sarah turned to leave, Eleanor called after her, her voice unusually soft. Sarah. I know this isn't easy, but perhaps in time, this life will feel like it belongs to you. Sarah paused, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her expression before she composed herself once more. Maybe, she replied quietly, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince. Back in her room, Sarah took a moment to let it all sink in. She would become someone's wife, a member of the Blake family, a link between two wealthy, powerful houses. She was stepping into a future entirely removed from the life she'd once imagined for herself. The next day, Sarah sat at the polished mahogany table. To her left were Richard and Eleanor Caldwell, looking crisp and composed as ever, their postures radiating a sense of authority. Across from them sat Lawrence and Beatrice Blake, dignified and intimidating in their expensive suits. And in the center of it all was Alexander Blake, seated in his wheelchair, his sharp eyes appraising the room with a detached gaze. The air was thick with tension as the lawyers finished detailing the terms of the marriage contract. Sarah kept her hands in her lap, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve as she listened intently. This was no ordinary marriage agreement, every line of the contract felt like another chain tightening around her freedom. It was then that she let herself glance directly at Alexander. He was striking, with high cheekbones and a cool, measured look. His dark hair was styled neatly, and though his face was calm, Sarah caught a flicker of something beneath the surface, a quiet defiance, perhaps, or maybe a simmering frustration. But what stood out most to her was his posture in the wheelchair. There was a stiffness there, a subtle strain that seemed too precise, as if he were holding himself in place rather than simply sitting. He looked less resigned than a man should in his condition, and something about it struck her as unnatural. She must have stared too long because he suddenly looked up, his gaze meeting hers with piercing intensity. His eyes were a deep, stormy blue, and they held hers a beat longer than was appropriate. He didn't smile, didn't acknowledge her with even the faintest nod, but his gaze carried a strange understanding, almost as if he, too, felt trapped by this arrangement. The lawyer's voice broke the silence. With that, both parties will sign here, to formalize the engagement and the terms stipulated. Beatrice Blake leaned forward, her voice dripping with a polished warmth that didn't quite reach her eyes. We are so pleased, Sarah, to have you joining our family. Alexander is a man of high standards and noble character, and we're confident he'll make an excellent husband. Sarah forced a polite smile, though she could feel Alexander's gaze on her still. Thank you, Mrs. Blake, she replied, keeping her voice steady. Alexander finally spoke, his voice low but with a trace of a dry, unyielding wit. You'll have to forgive my mother, Sarah. She tends to speak as if I'm not here. A flicker of surprise crossed Beatrice's face, though she quickly masked it with a delicate chuckle. Oh, Alexander, dear, we're just thrilled that you'll have such a lovely bride by your side during your recovery. Recovery? Sarah repeated, her brow arching slightly as she looked at him. Yes, recovery, he replied smoothly, his gaze narrowing as he watched her reaction. My accident has left me in this chair, after all. Something about the way he said accident felt off, like a challenge wrapped in a confession. She held his gaze, wondering just how deep his hidden struggles ran. But whatever she was seeing, Alexander seemed in no hurry to reveal.